My name is Lydia Sturgis, and I am from Asheville, North Carolina, and I currently work as a dealer service rep, primarily all of our key account management for La Sportiva. I would say my main outdoor sports are definitely climbing, and grad school has thrown a wrench in the frequency of all of these things, but climbing, hiking, backpacking, camping of all sorts, really starting to take a keen interest in diving into the mountaineering world recently. I think especially being around all these giant mountains is making me want to see what that's about.
Lydia, how did you come to the outdoors?
So I started working in the industry when I was 15. I worked for a gear shop, and prior to that, kind of around that younger age, my brother was in Boy Scouts, and I was very close with my dad, and I would go to meetings with them and trips. I'd spent the night in a bat cave, went on a fishing trip, go hiking, camping, all the things. And so I think that's probably where I was initially exposed to the outdoors. I think my parents probably, exposed me to it. They were big backpackers. I never did Girl Scouts. I thought that was kind of silly because I think it just made me think of cookies for some reason, and that to me wasn't indicative of what I wanted to do in the outdoors. And so my mom kind of created this. It was like a group of the other girlfriends that I had. We had the Adventure Girls, and we would go to the botanical gardens and like run around there, and they would take us on trips outside a lot. And so that was, I think, probably the very beginning phases of it. And then of course summer camp happened, and I think summer camp is so, it's a financial investment, so I understand not everybody can do it, but summer camp is just, it's a very humbling experience. And the one that I went to was, in some way, shape, or form, it was a little bit of a church camp, but it was non-denominational. It wasn't something where you had to be, I think there was all wigs of religion there, but that was kind of the foundation of it, but it never, like, you weren't pressured into having some sort of belief. It was very much around, like, we're gonna go outside and play and have fun. And there was a backpacking trip that I went on. I think my first and longest backpacking trip I did with this summer camp. And that was, I think, kind of where all of the outdoor pull started to happen. I was the girl that wore chacos in middle school and in high school. And, people would make fun of me for it, and then they'd go to college and they'd get their chacos. And I'm like, oh, I knew you would wear those at some point and make fun of me for it. Between Boy Scouts and my mom's creation of the Adventure Girls, I was exposed to the outdoors pretty young. So, and I was always outside. I was like just covered in dirt at all times.
What did you, as a young woman getting into the outdoors, need from a female role model? Did you have one? What did that, or what would that look like ideally for you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about wanting to get into the outdoors is having somebody to show you the way, sort of thing. Like having someone holding you accountable to spend time in the outdoors. Because I think part of that is, there's that insecurity of, like, if you've never done something, you're like, okay, well, like, I'm not going to just do it alone unless I know too much and have watched too much YouTube videos or something like that. But yeah, I think it's just like having somebody that's going to hold you accountable and kind of guide you through and show you and allow you to make mistakes and be in a vulnerable space. So I think that was really important. I definitely, the summer camp, like, counselors that we had, they were female role models at a younger age of how to show up in the outdoors and to be bold and to have courage and vulnerability at the same time. And when I got to college, I had a role model that she was my boss in the outdoor gear shop that I worked at when I was in school. I think I cared more about working there than college most days. But I worked for this place called Foot Sluggers in Boone, North Carolina. I went to Appalachian State and played soccer my freshman year, but that's all side. She was my boss, and she and I would go running. She was the one that I went climbing with kind of seriously the first time, and she definitely kind of in the outdoors showed up for me and supported me and gave me words of encouragement and challenged me. And then outside of that, like in my professional life, in school, and just like personal growth and support within like a professional environment at work, gave me that support. And so I think it's kind of like creating a container, like a good role model should create a container for you to show up in and be vulnerable. And so I think that's what's necessary, I think, for a good role model to embody. So there's a lot of things that I think individually women have to do and have to be aware of in order to show up and be leaders for our younger generations. And it's like that self-awareness. It's making sure that you have the right words to put behind how you feel and what you think of yourself and the values that you hold and your sense of purpose. And I think a lot of people don't spend the time searching for that until they're in their like mid-30s, 40s. And it's like we should be identifying that and it evolves, of course. It's not something that's going to stay the same for your whole life.
I'm gonna hit this one. Oh, I think so.
I think you did, yeah, we did. But it's one of those things that like that mindset will change, but it's something that like you should be having those conversations from an early start to kind of identify how to then build off of that. It's like your building blocks, your foundation of who you are to be able to step into a leadership role and learn where your strengths and weaknesses are. If that's being timid, soft-spoken, or bold and intense and aggressive, which are words that I have been told that I am, which is fine. That's just who I am. But yeah, it's definitely something that there's it's kind of like we address the problems and then we don't see what the underlying cause of those problems are. Like we don't look at that stuff. We see the problem as like where we should work from when we need to look at like, okay, well, how did we get to that spot? And then how can we change it or make it better or not recreate the same problem over and over and over and over again. It's all storytelling. I think storytelling is very important in kind of an aspect of learning that we could really, that would help our younger generation learn, is tell stories of things that we've been through and times that we've failed and, had a hard time in the outdoors, because it happens a lot. We swim all the time.
Oh, I flipped again.
Maybe it's in a shoe. I'm gonna drink a beer out of a shoe. What is it, the booty beer? Yeah.
That's a kayak thing. We gotta stay away from that.
You tried? Yeah, okay, that's fair. The most effective strategy is to build confidence as women in the outdoors, and I think it's like become comfortable with no and making mistakes and failing. Like I think we sometimes hold ourselves to such a high standard of success that we then are like terrified of making a mistake or not getting to the top of something, not achieving something. And so there's a balance there that has to be created, and an understanding that it's so okay for those to happen and to learn from them. That's the other part, is to make sure that like, when we do mess up and make those mistakes, that we truly learn from them. And I know that I feel like it's like a lot of the things that need to be done are broken records and cliche sayings, but they're cliches for a reason. And I think we need to stop ignoring them or stop putting them in this like category. Well, that's a cliche. But like, yeah, it is.
How do your core values drive you in the outdoors?
Yes, this is interesting because my course that I'm taking for my master's program, one of the first like weeks of class, she had us identify what our core values were. And mine are wholeheartedness and curiosity and optimism. I really associate a lot with optimism. I feel like I've always shown up in most environments as a very like positive person. Even if it's a heavy subject matter or something terrible has happened, I tend to try, not out of avoiding that, I don't think, but I tend to try to hold myself to this like, okay, well, this could be worse. Let's try and like figure something else out. But I think that does come to play, like, going into the outdoors, you do have to have a sense of like curiosity and be willing to embrace it wholeheartedly and then find the joy in it. And that's kind of where all of my core values seem to play into how I show up when I go play outside. And, it's good for your mental health. That's for sure. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because being in the outdoors gives you that perspective of how things could be versus like the reality of the situation and what we might think this is the worst thing, and it's like, well, it's raining, it's fine,
Yeah.
versus and then having that space to be able to make those mistakes. I think that is huge in the outdoors because you're going to.
Mm-hmm. And you have no control over what nature wants to do with you.
Where mistakes are just variables that you have to deal with.
Yeah.
What comes. So that's an interesting perspective. I didn't think of it specifically that way. Of you just have to learn. You get what's handed to you, like, and how you prepared, and then the reality of the situation.
Yeah. And I've had one of my favorite stories around where my core values really had to show up strongly for me. I was living in Bozeman, Montana for about 7 years after school, and the highest peak there is Granite Peak. And my climbing partner and I went up to do it, and the plateau that sits below this peak is called the Froze to Death Plateau. So that's already setting me up for like this eerie feeling of like, okay, am I gonna die up here? What's happening? And so we successfully summited, came back down, and because we got delayed by another group that was that was climbing at the same time as us, they were a little bit slower and didn't have all the gear that they needed, and so we gave them some of our gear, and that slowed us down. But anyway, long story short, basically that whole experience, we got stuck. We got lost up on this plateau. And there is a podcast on this with the She Explorers. She and I talked for a while. That was fun. But we got stuck on this like plateau and had to spend the night, and found the trail at like 4 a.m, talked to search and rescue on the phone. I mean, all sorts of things were happening, but we were laughing the whole time. I was delirious to the point where I thought boulders were like giant boulders were tents, and at one point we did get to sit down and rest for a little bit, and I remember like sitting straight up and like catching myself, and so it was a challenge on my body. It was the first time I had been in that kind of a challenging situation, but I just remember we were singing the whole time. We weren't injured. We had, food and water. We were okay. And I think showing up with that like mentality of like, stuff is gonna happen, but you're okay. So, yeah, it was a wild experience for sure. We got down. We freaked out a lot of friends, but we got down.
Yeah, that sounds like quite the experience.
It's fun. But I lived for it. Like I learned so much from that. Like I definitely did some stupid things that I could have prepared for better. And now going into other trips that I have coming up, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to depend on anyone else, because it's just me that I have to worry about in essence. I mean, sure, if you're in a group, you want to like be concerned of the people that you're with and like make sure that they're taken care of and not like hypothermic or something like that. But it's still you that you have to be responsible for. And that's not as daunting of a task as I think a lot of people think it is. So.
Would you say that's more of like a planning and having your gear, but also, or is there another way that you would be prepared, like mentally or something like that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with education about like how to prepare for trips like that and the access to that education. There's certainly are classes that you can take, but they're $1,200. And so that then creates this exclusive mindset of people who can and cannot enter into that space. And I think mentally it just takes like it's kind of like what I think I said this earlier before maybe we started recording, but like seeking to understand and then to be understood. So like before you go to on a trip, you want to understand where you're going, what you're doing, what gear you're going to need, all possible outcomes. It's kind of like thinking almost like an engineer in a way. And then when you're on your trip, you try to make sure that everything is understood within you and you're like the party that you're with. And so it's this like, I guess mental preparation kind of does definitely come into play with that of understanding what you're getting yourself into and being honest with yourself about the dangers and risks, because that is a huge part of this. Is the outdoor is it's dangerous. People die all the time doing it, especially out here. Especially. I almost got like numb to it, and people would die and I'd be like, oh, that's sad, okay, move on. And that's not me discounting their death or not saying that they're not important or that their value doesn't hold any weight, but it's not surprising anymore. So, and I, totally haven't had somebody close to me pass away in the outdoors like that, so I can't relate. I can't understand the weight of that, and I'm sure a lot of people will feel differently, and that's, I just haven't experienced it, so I think that's why that comment came out, like, more so. It's not meant to be like the tell-all, like, I'm right and you're wrong kind of thing.
How would you guide a young female athlete to maximize her potential in the outdoors?
I think we sort of touched on this earlier. I think if I were mentoring someone, I would really try to get to know what their core values are, what their learning style is, and kind of just how they communicate, and where they feel comfortable, like figuring out what their comfort zone is, and then pushing them to step outside of that comfort zone. There's this really cool concept called wasugi. I think I'm saying that right. Could be really botching that, but essentially what it is once a year you find something that pushes you outside of your comfort zone, and let's say you run 3 miles comfortably. Well, could you run 6? Probably. Could you run like 9 or 15 or whatever? Like, okay, no, that's a little far, but like trying to do it. And so I think if I were mentoring someone, I would just, kind of get to know them at the heart of who they are, and then start to encourage them to kind of step outside of that. And, through baby step intervals, of course, because I think that's probably one of the more successful ways to elevate yourself a little bit. Like giving, like, instead of, I think of New Year's resolutions, I think a lot of people put a lot of weight on themselves and they want to take off weight, essentially, because that's most people's New Year's resolutions. But they don't give themselves baby steps within that. Like, let's say you want to lose 10 pounds. Okay, well, what does that look like? Well, like, what do you need to do to change to make yourself obtain that goal? Okay, well, I need to start drinking a lot more water. I need to go for a walk 30 minutes a day. So those are 2 things. Do one of those things. Make that your New Year's resolution. I'm going to walk for 30 minutes a day. And then put it in your work schedule. Put it in your schedule in your life. If you eventually to the point, and I think that those are tools that you can then give somebody younger, of teaching them how to create routines and discipline in their life, because it's not something you're born with. It's something that you have to learn. Discipline in your own life if you don't have super strict parents or someone encouraging you to create those habits. I think that would definitely be a big part of something that I would have benefited from at a younger age that I didn't get enough of, and I'm now having to almost learn on my own of how to create those routines and disciplines in my life. Not like in an obsessive way, but just enough that I am taken care of and that I am successful in all the things that I do. And know that there will be days that it doesn't happen. Like this morning, I stayed up way too late doing homework, and I woke up an hour late this morning, and I was frantic when I came in, and that put my day off on a wrong foot. One of my coworkers acknowledged it and checked in with me, and I've been good since. And I went for a run, actually, like 30 minutes before you guys got here. So it's like one of those things of like, you have to create systems. And if I were mentoring someone, I would start with that, of like creating habits and baby steps and like health behavioral change within like their lives, and how, and like very microscopic level, like making sure that like the very basic minimum things that you need to do to be healthy mentally, physically, are happening in your life. A lot of women go on birth control at a young age, and for varying reasons. But a lot of people just go on it because they think they should, because it's like, you know, in an age that you're on it. But then you get to like 30, where I am now, and I'm like, I've been on birth control for 15 years. What does my body think without it? And understanding my cycle, and then like I have my best friend's a guy, and I made him, he now understands a woman's cycle like to a T, but that's a conversation that's not happening. We're, you know, periods and menstruation and all of that tends to be kind of like a no-no topic for some reason. And so I think normalizing that and helping our younger generation understand their bodies, because I think that tends to be an area where our confidence starts to lack and our timidness comes out because of our confidence in ourselves.
So how do we address that inner timidness? And what direction do we need to take to build our understanding of how to work through that?
Yeah. I actually wrote down an example about this because I have a dog, and with dogs specifically, and you know, humans and dogs are a little bit similar in ways, but with when a dog is timid, you teach it to play tug of war, and tug of war causes them to gain confidence. So, which is interesting to me because it's this like, you know, like challenging thing that a dog is doing. They're trying to, you know, get whatever it is out of either another dog's mouth or your hand. And so I think part of what will help pull people out of their timid corner is to challenge them very gently at first. And it's this like baby step behavioral change that you have to implement when you want to make a change. It usually takes like 30 to 40 days to implement a new habit into your life, at least. And then setting very small steps and goals within that window of how you're going to get to that change. If you're timid, you likely don't want to speak out. You likely don't want to try new things because you're not sure. There's like this like just like unsure of what is going to happen or how you're going to do it or if you're going to be able to even do it. I've seen that before in younger girls of like just like I don't want to, like I'd rather just sit over here and y'all do your thing. I've totally seen that in both girls and boys. Like it's not just a gender thing. But I think stepping back and like trying to get them at least one step closer to even getting to the starting line is going to be challenging them on a more microscopic level and getting them to the point where they can build the courage to be that vulnerable and step up to the plate and like, you know, try it, whatever it is that they're trying to do. I think a lot of the timidness can sometimes be from like past traumas that have happened in lives and insecurities around that. And I think identifying what trauma has potentially caused that and doing work around that can help you progress into a more confident space. It's that knowing factor that I think really will pull people out of their timid holes. And it's okay to be timid. It's actually even encouraged to approach things sometimes in the outdoors with caution and to be, because I mean, like, I guess I think of an example of like climbing up like something exposed or doing something that's dangerous. It's like, you don't want to go in 90 miles an hour. You want to be timid. And I think maybe that is also a good point to kind of foster of embracing people who are timid and saying like, actually, no, this is a really good characteristic for you to have, because what it allows you to do is to be careful in times when you really need to be, especially in the outdoors. So I think it's not a bad thing to be timid, but I also think it can hinder you from wanting to step into more of a leadership role.
What is it about valuing emotional intelligence that is so critical to women's success in the outdoors?
Emotional intelligence is definitely, I think, a characteristic that a lot of women harbor, as opposed to the physical strength side, which is changing. And I think it's super critical for us to be able to feel what we're feeling when we're in the outdoors and when we're in leadership like roles is to make sure that we not necessarily wear our feelings on our sleeve per se, but like hold those feelings of confidence or scared or whatever is happening in that moment. I think those are very critical to be able to vocalize and not bottle up and keep in, because it will then kind of hinder you in other ways and prevent you from being successful and achieving things that you would like to achieve. And physical prowess, I really think not necessarily, you don't need to be like the strongest person to get to the top of a mountain. I don't think strength is what usually allows people to do all of these things in the outdoors successfully. I definitely think the emotional intelligence is the most critical aspect.
So what traits in yourself do you believe have allowed you to achieve success in the outdoors?
Yeah, well, I've said this word a few times, my optimism, I think has been really important in the outdoors, just to kind of just keep on the sunny side of life a little bit. Building relationships has been a characteristic that I've definitely, a trait that I've had for all of my life. I'll talk to a wall, and I think that is really beneficial for gathering information and kind of like getting people who are potentially just as stoked as you are to go into the outdoors and play together. But building relationships and trust has been a big, I think, part of who I have been when I show up in those outdoor spaces, and just leading by example sort of thing. I think that's how I've always shown up in the outdoors. And I don't know, a free spirit, I think that's a really important trait to have, is like just kind of letting your weirdness be there. And yeah, I'm weird as shit. I like really know that, and it's something that I've become more and more aware of as I get older. I'm like, oh my god. And those guys all really love the fact that I'm that weird. Like they allow me to say things, and maybe they don't respond, and I have to like sit with my uncomfortableness sometimes, and I'm like, oh well, whatever. And I think that's, brush off the things that make you feel uncomfortable, because they're very fleeting moments, and I don't know. I just don't have time for that. I don't have time to be negative.
What were, in your opinion, the most effective strategies for you to build confidence as a woman in the outdoors?
Yeah, I think we definitely touched on this earlier. Becoming comfortable with no and failure and mistakes. I think those are going to be really, really effective strategies to just be confident in the outdoors, because I think seeing those failures allow you to be successful. It's like 9 times out of 10 you're successful. 1 time you might not be, and that's okay. And so I think having the kind of like gentle acceptance of success and failure, and not putting so much weight on either side, is going to be a really good strategy to approach like trying new things in the outdoors and having fun. Don't forget to just have fun, even if it sucks, because our bodies are so capable of so many things. And I think a lot of people don't get to see that until they get into that, like these outdoor sports, and like you're not going to be good at something when you first try it. I think that's the other thing. You first learn to snowboard, you're probably going to fall for most of the day, but how can you fall gracefully? I think that's what I would challenge people on. If I were teaching somebody to snowboard, how can you fall gracefully? Well, definitely don't put your wrist down. That's a bad idea. But I guess maybe like supporting women in the outdoors with tools to fail successfully. Basically, I think that's probably one of the bigger strategies. I would try to go at that avenue of like, okay, well, if you're gonna fail at something, at least the first few times that you do it, here's how you do it. Here's how you fail, and then here's how you like succeed. And like just giving them space to be like, okay, we're gonna have fun and just enjoy doing it. And I don't know. I think a lot of women tend to, and I see this in some of my friends, they go on that edge of caring what other people think too much, and that prevents them from trying things and being able to fail. It's like this perfectionist MO that they get through. But yeah, they care too much about what other people think, and I think trying to break down those walls and really just concerning yourself with you, because it's just you. You're always alone. Even in moments when you're with a lot of people, it's always just you. And when I realized that myself, of I'm always going to be the only person in a room that's full of people, like individually. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But like just kind of trying to look at it in that perspective of like identifying that like, oh, it's just me against me. That's pretty great. It's not a competition. And so I think supporting women to not view it in that way will make it a lot easier, and stop comparing yourself to every other girl, every other guy, every other situation. Like, just go about it the way you think you should go about it. And if you mess up, or maybe it's not you messing up, maybe it's you just taking a different route. Because in climbing especially, there are a million different ways to go up a rock.
Where do you want to see female outdoor athletes in 5 years?
I just want to see them using their voices more, and trying to I would say like vocalize what they want to learn and why they want to learn it. I think that's part of it, is like just saying like identifying what you want to get out of something, what your clear expectation is of the outdoors and the sports that you're doing, and the mentors that you have. Like I would hope that our female athletes can be more vocal about what they need, and not, shy away in the corners.
We have our junior team that's between the ages of 14 and 16.
Liberty!
What insight would you offer to them if they were sitting here right now?
I feel like I've said this a few times, but make mistakes and learn from them, like big time. And lean into all of those cliche sayings that you're hearing, like really lean into them. And you're not the voice in your mind, you're just the one that hears it. And I think creating that mentality for our younger generation to, especially like a group of adolescent teenagers, to really hone in on understanding that there's the voice in your mind talking, and then there's you, and they're not the same thing, and differentiating that. And so I don't know. It's kind of a heavy afterthought.
Yeah, I think that's super important to realize that, you don't have to listen to the nagging voice in the back of your head that tells you can't do it. You know, you're not that person. Mm-mm. So you don't have to listen to them.
No. Yeah, and I think when you realize how to separate the two, it becomes pretty transformative for you to be able to progress and to push yourself past where you've been, and be able to teach yourself discipline. And also I would tell them to just get good sleep. That would be probably one other advice I would give them. And it's a broken record, but it's one of those cliche things. I'm like, you should value your sleep as an athlete. Like, if you want to achieve and push yourself in the outdoors, you got to be able to rest and give yourself time to rest and recover. Like, I think that is, one of the most important parts of playing in the outdoors, is to make sure that you wind down and reflect on what happened, or how you felt doing something, and where it was hard or where it was easy, and how you could push yourself to go beyond that. Yeah. Always be faster than the boys. You know that movement? Just always. I think of that sometimes when I'm hiking with like a group of guys. I'm like, I'm gonna get out in front. I'm gonna be in the front.